At about 7 o'clock on the evening of 18 June 1815, as the sun began to lower over the battlefield, Napoleon finally sent in the men he had carefully protected for years, the Imperial Guard. These were France's absolute best and most feared soldiers. They marched steadily uphill toward Wellington's line, while the ground behind them filled with thick black smoke, deep mud, and the unmistakable sound of an exhausted army beginning to lose its faith. Napoleon knew he was running out of time. He needed one major breakthrough, just one clean strike. If his elite guard could shatter the British line before the Prussian army fully closed in on his flank, he could still turn the disaster of Waterloo into another brilliant legend. But the unthinkable happened. Instead of pushing through, the Imperial Guard stopped. They wavered under devastating point-blank British musket fire. And then, they turned back. When the rest of the exhausted soldiers saw their elite heroes retreating, a wave of shock swept through the ranks. The whole French army suddenly understood something Napoleon could not afford to admit. The final gamble had completely failed. What makes the story of Waterloo so interesting is that Napoleon was not being reckless in the simple way most people imagine. After escaping his island exile just months earlier, he knew that all of Europe was rapidly building massive armies to remove him from power again. France simply could not survive a long, drawn-out war against a united continent. So Napoleon chose the only plan that gave him a real fighting chance. He decided to move fast into Belgium, deliberately keep Wellington and the Prussian army apart, and beat each enemy separately before they could combine forces. And for a brief moment, it actually worked. He defeated the Prussians at Ligny and successfully pushed his enemies apart. This was the exact kind of rapid, confusing campaign he had used to win his greatest victories before. But the Prussians didn't just disappear. They retreated north, critically staying in close contact with Wellington. Napoleon was still looking at the battlefield as if the pieces would move exactly where his past victories had taught him to expect. Then, the relentless rain came. The night before the Battle of Waterloo was absolutely soaked, and by morning, the battlefield ground was thick, heavy, and practically unworkable. Because of this, Napoleon made a crucial decision. He delayed his morning attack. He wanted to wait for the deep mud to dry just enough so his heavy artillery cannons and fast cavalry could maneuver properly. In the moment, it seemed like a completely logical tactical choice. Cannons needed firm ground to bounce their cannonballs, and horses needed steady footing. But it turned out to be a fatal strategic error. Every single hour he waited for the sun to dry the mud gave the Prussian army another hour to desperately march closer to Wellington's position. This is exactly where a brilliantly smart plan starts to become a deadly trap. Napoleon had originally begun this entire campaign because time was strictly against him. Yet here at Waterloo, he spent precious hours he simply did not have, hoping for a cleaner battlefield and a more perfect victory. When the French attack finally did begin, they found that Wellington had made the field incredibly difficult on purpose. Most of his British troops were hidden securely behind a ridge, safely protected from the French artillery fire. The fortified farm of Hougoumont became a brutal, grinding fight that swallowed up French troops, eating away even more time. And by the afternoon, Napoleon's worst nightmare appeared on his right flank. The Prussians had arrived. The immense pressure of the arriving Prussians completely warped Napoleon's decision-making. Desperate to break Wellington's center before the trap snapped shut, he ordered his French cavalry to charge. Again and again, the horses threw themselves at the Allied infantry squares. But the British squares held their ground like walls of iron. Time had run out. With Blücher's Prussians now actively tearing into his flank, Napoleon was forced to reach for the very last thing he had kept back, his ultimate weapon, the Imperial Guard. But this was no longer a calculated, masterful strike. It was a move of pure desperation. Napoleon was not launching the Guard into an open path to a glorious victory. Instead, he was sending his finest men straight into Wellington's strongest, most heavily defended ground. He was sending them late in the day, up a muddy hill, while his own army was stretched dangerously thin across a battlefield it could no longer control. As the Guard advanced, the hidden British infantry stood up and met them with devastating, concentrated fire. The unstoppable French elite halted, their formations broke, and as they fell back down the ridge, the sight shattered the morale of the entire French army. Panic spread faster than any general could stop it. the lines dissolved, and Napoleon was forced to flee the field. Waterloo was not lost because Napoleon suddenly forgot how to fight. He lost because he had built his entire strategy on lightning speed, but then allowed the battle to become fatally slow. He expected the Prussians to stay away, and treated their arrival as a problem he could just solve later. A final gamble can feel incredibly brave when you are the person making it. But if the board has fundamentally changed, doubling down on the exact same old plan is not confidence. It is simply a blind refusal to see what has already happened.